April 6, 1924, four Douglas World cruisers set out from Seattle to make the first around-the-world airplane flight. Named for U.S. cities, the Seattle, Chicago, Boston, and New Orleans were crewed by 8 U.S. Army Flying Service pilots and mechanics. On April 30th, Seattle crashed in fog on the Alaskan Peninsula. Amazingly, Major Frederick Martin and Staff Sergeant Alva Henry walked out of the wilderness 8 days later. August 3rd, Boston sank in heavy seas in the North Atlantic. 175 days, 27,553 miles, and 61 stops later, the surviving ships returned to Seattle. These aerial Magellans became the first to circumnavigate the world by air. The story of Charles Lindbergh's solo crossing of the Atlantic in 1927 is well known. Not as well known are the thoughts and beliefs of the enigmatic, reclusive aviator. He once wrote, "Science, freedom, beauty, adventure. What more could you ask of life? Aviation combined all of the elements I loved. I began to feel that I lived on a higher plane than the skeptics on the ground. Who valued life more highly, the aviators who spent it on the art they loved, or these misers who doled it out like pennies? I decided that if I could fly for 10 years before I was killed in a crash, it would be a worthwhile trade for an ordinary lifetime." Lindbergh died of cancer at age 72 on the island of Maui, August 26, 1974. She will always be the First Lady of American Aviation. In January 1921, she took her first lesson. By July, she had bought her first airplane. In 1928, she was the first woman to fly the Atlantic. In 1932, the first to solo it. Congress awarded her the Distinguished Flying Cross. She wrote 2 books, was an editor of Cosmo, a university consultant, and an airline vice president. Amelia Earhart's attempt to fly around the world in 1937 claimed her life at age 40. Of her flying, she once wrote, "Please know that I am well aware of the hazards. I want to do it because I want to do it. Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others." The legendary Chuck Yeager became the first pilot to exceed the speed of sound on October 14, 1947, in the Bell X-1. Aircraft which had approached Mach 1 had experienced severe buffeting in the controls. No one knew for sure what lay beyond the so-called barrier. The small, bullet-shaped X-1 had thin, strong wings and an adjustable horizontal stabilizer. Yeager later wrote, "Leveling off at 42,000 feet, I noticed the faster I got, the smoother the ride. We were flying supersonic and it was smooth as a baby's bottom. Grandma could be sitting up there sipping lemonade." How far had we come and how fast? In 1947, 76-year-old Orville Wright was still alive. Can an airplane fly 25,000 miles around the world non-stop without being refueled? It can, if it looks like this. December 14, 1986, former Air Force fighter pilot Dick Rutan and co-pilot Gina Yeager coaxed the Voyager, designed by Dick's legendary brother Bert and built with their own hands, into the air at Edwards Air Force Base. The Voyager carried nearly 10 times its own weight in fuel. They flew for 9 days in a cabin just 3.5 by 7 feet, returning to Edwards on December the 23rd. President Reagan said, along with Orville and Wilbur Wright, Charles Lindbergh, and Chuck Yeager, history will now record Dick Rutan, Gina Yeager, and Bert Rutan.